The title of the show is Prologue to the Story of the Birth of Freedom. The Ten Commandments in the 1950s, at the time, one of the most elaborate, if not the most elaborate, the most expensive kind of epic historical drama produced in that generation, and really inaugurating like this idea of kind of spectacle on an ever-growing scale. The film begins, oddly enough, with a scene of Cecil B. DeMille, the director of the film, appearing from behind these giant curtains on a theatrical stage. And he comes out and he addresses the audience as though he were live inside a theater rather than in a film. And he says to the audience, "What you're about to see is the story of the birth of freedom." Just this idea that what we're dealing with in Hollywood is a question of like storytelling that potentially goes back to the most ancient patterns and is constantly being reframed, reinvented through newer and newer media over the centuries, and that brings us to today. I was born in Hawaii and I grew up in the Philippines, or really grew up going back and forth between Hawaii and the Philippines. The common denominator was missionary education. So in a way, it continues to serve as a kind of filter that has been foundational for me in terms of understanding of American culture as not just something that's made and consumed by American citizens, but something that's projected around the world and in some ways is constituted around the world and appears a certain way if you live within the nation-state boundaries of the US, but in fact contains within it many very complicated relationships. And so the idea that like a specifically religious epic narrative would be the kind of subject of like the full Hollywood treatment I found intriguing. So The Saints, it is a kind of reinterpretation of the 1966 World Cup, a kind of epic soccer match that took place in Wembley Stadium in 1966. It was also the only time that the English who invented the game actually won the World Cup in a game against West Germany. And so it's almost a religious text for the English. It's a sacred nationalist text also for the English. And it came, only 20 years after the end of World War II, England versus West Germany. So the resonances of the war were totally explicit. English and German fans shouting chants that reference the war. Also singing hymns that are religious hymns, like when the Saints come marching in. The Incarnator series is it's kind of a similar dynamic in that it's purposefully taking something familiar and subjecting it to a process that is less familiar. The less familiar part is a kind of exploration of a centuries-old tradition of sculptural image making that is found across the Latin world, including the Philippines, of just the production of all of the main characters in the biblical narrative of Jesus Christ as physical, fleshed out figures that are meant for veneration in religious gatherings and religious ritual. The more familiar part is the image of Justin Bieber. And over the past few years, I've been collaborating with various santo makers, or like religious image makers, who already have workshops that have specialized for generations in making these religious images of the Virgin Mary and St. John the Baptist and the crucified Jesus. And I asked them to apply all of the usual formulas that they use, the same materials, the same processes to produce the image of the crucified and resurrected Jesus Christ, but with the face and the full body tattoos of Justin Bieber. I was thinking about Justin Bieber as kind of a kind of prototypical pop star of the internet era, discovered as a child at less than 10 years old via YouTube, turned into a global sensation. The first time I walked into the Geffen, the kind of the warehouse dimensions of this 30,000+ square feet space, and it being in downtown LA, just made me think about the dimensions of a soundstage. And even though this space, as far as I know, has never functioned as a soundstage, but has served other functions, the fact is it is a warehouse, a kind of like bunker, where you come inside and then you're just in another world. And so it's like a soundstage in which it's kind of a controlled environment within which then you could build stage sets or other environments, control the sound, control like the lighting. I think there's like a way in which we accept on an intuitive level a degree of movement between different kinds of spaces that overlap each other. And in some ways, you know, the inspiration is a soundstage. And thinking about a museum like MOCA, and particularly the Geffen space, as already, you know, formatted to encourage a kind of like visual and sensory play like a soundstage. And so it's in a way both seeing how far we could push it in terms of inventing many different worlds within this warehouse and creating a kind of choreography where a viewer can move through the exhibition and go through very different types of spaces, from the miniature and intimate to like the totally immersive and humongous.